Hi, I'm Bernard Keavy. This is what's known as the success equation. So talent, that means anything you're good at, so ability, knowledge, skills, etc. Plus wanting to do something, so desire, so there you would be setting goals, written goals, and envisaging actually achieving them. Plus optimism, which I'll come back to, plus actually doing something, plus action equals success. The one I want to focus on today is optimism. The way this works is in two ways, actually. The more optimistic you are, one, you're much more likely to achieve your goal because you actually believe you can do it. So if you're not optimistic, then you don't really believe you can achieve something, and therefore you probably won't. So being optimistic makes you much more likely to be successful in that regard. And the other thing is, the more optimistic you are, the more resilient you are, so therefore you're not put off or derailed by setbacks. Now, I was reading something recently called Learned Optimism by Martin Seligman, which is brilliant, by the way. And what's interesting is that you can actually learn to be more optimistic. And not only can you learn to be more optimistic, but you can actually teach yourself to become more optimistic almost instantly. And the way it works is this. When you compare optimism versus pessimism, or optimistic people versus pessimistic, they basically split out on three main criteria. There's another one here actually which I'll cover as well. The more that you're out of yourself as part of a wider, bigger goal than you, so maybe working for a charity or part of a religion, or doing something politically, so having a wider, larger goal, if you like, that gets you out of yourself, and that means you're much more likely to be optimistic rather than pessimistic. But apart from that, the way we think and the way we talk to ourselves is really crucial. So let me explain. If something happens that's bad, then a pessimist will be internal about it. They'll say, oh, that's my fault. Whereas an optimist tends to say, oh, that's because of, and they'll have an external factor. So for instance, if you had a bad month in sales, a pessimist would say, well, that's because I'm not very good at selling, it's down to me. Whereas an optimist might say something like, well, my best producers haven't really done it, or no one's buying these type of policies at the moment, or lockdown has stopped business. They'll have external, excuses, some people call it, but they'll have external reasons for something going wrong. And actually it's the opposite if something goes right. So if something goes right, an optimist will say, well, that's down to me. Whereas a pessimist will say, well, the only reason I was successful this month was because I was lucky enough to get this policy in that so-and-so wrote, and they'll put it down to an external factor. So this internal versus external is very big, if you like. The other one is general versus specific. So if something goes wrong, a pessimist will say, oh, well, that's the sort of thing that always happens to me. Whereas an optimist will say, okay, so this particular thing has gone wrong, but that doesn't mean it affects the rest of all the things I do. I'm still good at this, that, and the other. That's just an isolated adverse thing that's happened. And again, it's the opposite way around when things go well. If things go well, an optimist will say, well, that's because I'm so good, general. Whereas a pessimist might say, well, okay, I got lucky there, but generally, blah, blah, blah. And the same here, permanent versus temporary. So the way that works is if something goes wrong, a pessimist would say, oh, well, that's the sort of thing that always happens to me. Every time that's just my luck. Whereas an optimist will say, oh, well, okay, that's gone wrong. Let's just move on, because just because that's gone wrong doesn't mean that everything else is going to go wrong. And they'll get over it quickly, and they'll see it as a temporary factor. Which then moves me on to our strategy. So, and again, this is all from Martin Seligman's book, by the way. So the A, B, C, D, E strategy. So A stands for something adverse happening. B stands for what that makes us believe. So I should have had an arrow over there as well. So the belief bit here is, do we go for the pessimist strategies on the left? Do we believe that? Or do we believe the optimist strategies on the right? And then C, because of how we now believe, that will actually affect the consequences, which is why if we're on the pessimistic side here, we won't hit our goals and we won't be successful. But then the strategy says the next thing to do is D, which stands for, it actually stands for two things, actually. Distract, which is have a strategy to stop talking yourself down. So some people have a rubber band that they flick on their wrist, or in NLP you have an anchor. But the other way is just to dispute it. So when you say, oh, this is the sort of thing that always happens to me, you would say, well, always, so never ever does it happen that good things happen to me. Or you might say, so this is down to me, so it's not down to any other factors, so it's nothing to do with COVID, and it's nothing to do with times are hard in the marketplace. Do you see what I'm saying? So you would remember the D. So it's A, B, C, and then D is where you dispute the way you're talking to yourself. And if you can discipline yourself to do that, you'll turn from being pessimistic to seeing, well, certainly elements or shoots, if you like, of optimism. And then you'll feel more energized, which is the E bit. Now, there's a bit more to this, but basically that's it. So the A, B, C, D, E strategy is disputing the way you're talking to yourself, and then that will make you feel more energized. In NLP, there's a whole section, if you like, or a whole module, which is about how we talk to ourselves, and using the wrong language here makes a big difference in terms of the effect it has compared to using the right language. So I hope that makes sense. Now, what really helps you be more optimistic is if you're mixing with other optimistic people, which is the argument in favor of having an accountability partner, but also the argument in favor of being part of something like an advisory board, an alternative board, a mastermind group. And if you wanted to see some ideas as to how that might work for you, go to businessroundtableuk.co.uk and take a look.